Chapter 7. After dinner that night, Zack sat on his bed with a roll-dee, trying to make it work. The only tools he had were those for his bike and utensils from the kitchen. They were next to useless. When he finally managed to remove the waterproof seals and get at the locking screws, he found they needed a special screwdriver. Short of smashing the toy with a hammer, he'd never get it open. The thing was operated by 6 waterproof buttons, each with an LCD showing the status. Except the display was mostly black, where the liquid crystals had leaked. He downloaded an operating manual which gave the button sequences to choose the various options, but only one worked, the one that played music. And even this didn't seem to operate properly. There was just one tune that played over and over. Already he was sick of balalaika music. In the end, he gave up and climbed into bed. But the tune wouldn't let him sleep. Instead, he began working through the events of the day, particularly the encounter with the Russians, or Neanderthals, as Will called them. It was a good name. Zack could imagine them wearing bearskins and living in a cave. They could be called Ugg and Og instead of Ivan and Yuri. Again, the tune interrupted his thoughts. Where else had he heard it that day? And then it came to him. It was the whistling he'd heard coming from the gully. Somehow that tune was linked to Tasha. He now had no doubts that the 2 men were looking for her. They had called her name, whistled the tune, and reacted guiltily when he'd asked why they'd been calling out. Maybe the tune was important in finding her. But making that link still didn't allow him to sleep. The tune playing in his head was replaced by a whole lot of questions. Why the gun? Surely they wouldn't want to kill Tasha. Wouldn't their boss, Mikhail Popanoff, want her kept alive? And why the secrecy? Was there something illegal about the animal? After an hour of these questions demanding his attention, Zack gave up any further attempt to get to sleep. He got up, went to his computer, and began to search the net for answers. A search for dogs on yachts, New Zealand, yielded a possible answer to the secrecy question. Any animals must be secured on board, preferably below decks. If you're arriving with a dog or cat on board, contact the MAF inspector at port of arrival before coming alongside. Maybe Tasha had never been declared when the Anastasia first arrived. Then on a different site, Zack found, the following 4 breeds cannot be imported into New Zealand: American Pit Bull Terrier, Doggo Argentino, Brazilian Fila, and Japanese Tosa. This was another possibility. Although he knew the animal he'd seen wasn't a pit bull, maybe it was one of the others. After a brief search, he narrowed it down to the Doggo Argentino, the only breed that was white. One of the images even showed one with the shadowy spots, just like he'd seen on Tasha. The problem was he couldn't say for sure that was what he'd seen was a dog. It could have been some other animal. He thought of dog-sized animals he knew that had paws: bears, cats, otters, badgers, wolverines. None of them was white unless albino. A short time later, he found a website that showed a big range of albino mammals, and there he found an animal that could have been what he'd seen. The color and spots were perfect, except the body seemed a bit too thick. A younger one would, of course, be smaller. If he was right, then Mikhail Popanoff would have plenty of reasons for keeping Tasha secret. It would also explain the gun. Will had commented on the gun looking strange. Maybe it didn't shoot bullets. Zack's next search was for tranquilizer gun. 3 clicks later, he was looking at the rifle Yuri had been carrying. Now it all slipped into place. Tasha was not your usual pet, and the Neanderthals had been given the job of capturing her. A dart gun was needed because she'd be frightened by the unfamiliar surroundings. Possibly she had never lived in the wild before. Satisfied with his solution, Zack went back to bed and quickly fell asleep. In the early hours of the morning, Zack woke to a noise coming from outside. Somebody's out there. He lay on his back, scarcely breathing, waiting for the sound to come again. When 5 minutes of silence had passed, he'd moved to the window and peeked through a gap in the curtains. There was enough light to see the dark shapes, but he couldn't make out details. Nothing seemed to be moving. Still, it would be best to check with a torch. One of Crawford's purchases when they first arrived in Wellington was an LED spotlight. Zack had already tried it outside at night and found that its beam could reach all the way up to the turbines. If anyone was out there, this would pick them out. He didn't find anyone, and when he thought about it, he realized it had been a stupid thought. What would they be after? There was no farm equipment down here. The only vehicles were the old ute and his bike. Neither was worth stealing. After going to the toilet, Zack returned to bed. If there had been a sound, then most likely it was an animal. Maybe a pig. That thought took him back to the Neanderthals and their story of pig hunting. That's when he remembered the pistol, the one lying on the back seat of the pickup. The rifle was definitely a dart gun, but the pistol wasn't. There were bullets lying next to it. After that, he had trouble getting back to sleep, and this time the insomnia lasted until daylight. Sometime during the darkness, Zack had decided to tell his dad everything, except as soon as he saw his father in the morning, he changed his mind. Crawford was listening intently to Dub Dub FM, and his expression said he didn't like what he was hearing. Keith. Fat chance of that happening, Sally. Sally. I'm not so sure. The Virgin Islands are under American control. If anyone can get at Stanley Morris, surely the U.S. government can. Keith. But why would they bother? If they start picking on every crook who has a luxury hideout in the Caribbean, their economy would collapse. The only difference between these people and the olden day pirates is that they plunder finance companies instead of ships. Sally. Well, the Morris Investors Action Group believes they have a chance, or they wouldn't have taken legal action in the U.S. They think a forced sale of Morris's Virgin Island assets could return most of the money stolen from investors. That certainly seems worth the effort. Keith. Not going to happen, Sally. The best chance they've got is to step up the action against the rest of the Morris family, especially Crawford. He must know a lot more than he's letting on. Identical twins have the same genes. They're like the same person. Put pressure on Crawford, and Stanley is sure to buckle. There was no more because Crawford had turned off the radio. How can they get away with saying things like that? He asked, stomping back into the kitchen. That Keith person says anything that comes into his head, never mind whether there are any facts to support it. Zack followed him. Can't you take him to court or something? Crawford swung around at him. What? And give them more opportunities to attack us? He shook his head in frustration. No, he yelled. There's nothing we can do except wait for the storm to pass. Don't you understand anything? From years of experience, Zack knew when to be silent around his father. He grabbed a bowl of cereal, added milk, and returned to his room. He'd watch cartoons until things calmed down. Maybe there would be a chance for a decent conversation later. 2 hours passed before Crawford knocked on the open door. Sorry, Zack, he said. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. My apologies. Zack nodded his acceptance while still looking at the screen. What have you got planned for the day? I thought I might take a ride later. You could go with Jess if you want. I've just had a call from Will. Jess wants to come over and go riding with you. I said I'd call back. What do you think? Zack tried to mask his interest with a shrug. Where does she want to go? Karori Stream was mentioned. Yeah, okay, I suppose so. You could ask her to show you the quicksand. Quicksand? Yes, several of the books mentioned quicksand at the Karori stream mouth. I don't know how bad it is. Might not be there any more for all I know. Zack stood. I could check it out for you, he said. You might be able to use it in the book. His father nodded. I'll give you my small camera so you can take some photos. He gave a little grin. Be careful, though. I don't want you disappearing completely.